If you're like me, I just rely on the recipes from the New York Times food section for all my meals. And with that, Melissa and Sam, bon appetit.
Thank you, Amy. It's so great to be here. Welcome, everybody. My name is Melissa Clark, obviously, as Amy just said, and I'm going to be asking Sam Sifton lots of questions about food, about the New York Times, but we want to hear your questions too. So just to repeat what Amy just said, it's slido.com, and when you get there, just put in hashtag curated cuisine, and then Amy's going to be texting me all your questions, so don't hesitate. But Sam, let's start out with, do you want to start out with your new cookbook, which isn't even so new anymore, or do you want to start out with NYT Cooking? Where do you want to go first?
I'm going to let you lead this dance, but I am really excited to talk about New York Times Cooking's No Recipe Recipes, because I think it's it's like an interesting form that has taken flower during the pandemic, and it's been really exciting to see.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we start off though with a little background about NYT Cooking. So you are the founding editor of NYT Cooking. What was it like to bring this thing to fruition, and why was there a need for it?
So New York Times Cooking actually turns 7 tomorrow, which is astonishing to me. My kids are growing up fast, but boy, this site is growing up fast as well. New York Times Cooking came about because we had a bet that we wanted to make. And the bet was that we could capture the same kind of lightning in a bottle that one of my predecessors, Craig Claiborne, was able to capture when he put together the New York Times cookbook that was on my mother's shelf, your mother's shelf. And when I was national editor, I saw it in kitchens all across the country, 30, 40 years after it was published. The New York Times cookbook was at a time when the New York Times was not an international newspaper or a national newspaper. It wasn't even really like a regional newspaper. It was a metropolitan daily competing with a lot of other metropolitan dailies in the New York area. The New York Times cookbook was a national bestseller, and it remained a national bestseller for the better part of a decade. And I thought that was powerful, and I thought that was repeatable in the digital age. And there were others at the Times who believed in that vision as well, you among them. And we were able to do this kind of amazing bit of housekeeping, which was to take about 15,000 recipes that we had published on our website from like 1982 on, and convert them into a database that we could then build upon as a product, as a living, breathing cookbook that we could mount a business on. And that we've done. And now there are over 20,000 recipes on New York Times Cooking, representing the very best of what our reporters and critics, our photographers, and our home cooks can bring forth for the reader. And it's been exhilarating to watch the growth.
I think a lot of people don't understand the work that goes into making the recipes for NYT Cooking, because people think, well, oh, you just digitize a recipe, but there's so much more than just digitizing a recipe. I mean, you have to make it searchable, you have to add art, you have to create a package around it. And I feel like, could you just take us through a little bit of the process of like what happens, when,
Absolutely.
So I give you a recipe and then what?
So thank you for asking that question, because I think it does seem as if it just happens, and it doesn't just happen. You can have one of the great recipes in the world, and no one will make it if there isn't a beautiful photograph attached to it. No one will make it if you don't have what we call, it's a term of art, a top note, an introductory paragraph on the recipe that explains maybe how delicious it is, or how simple it is to make, or what the one little trick that you need to know about in order to achieve success is. So we need to take that photograph. Well, that's a big job, because it's got to be a good photograph. You can't just, if I'm taking pictures of my food and I think my food is beautiful and as well as delicious, but if I took the photograph, it would look like it was served in a prison. And we need So we need stylists to work with us to make the food not look, to make the food look real, because it is real. We don't mess with it in any way. We need photographers who can deliver photographs that fit within the aesthetic of New York Times Cooking, but don't offer a kind of relentless sameness. And we work hard to make sure that those photographs aren't of such a particular moment that they'll seem old in a year or two. So you have the production of the image, you have the storytelling that goes into the top note, you have the proper credit given. The New York Times is a journalistic operation, and we have a pretty clear mission, which is to seek the truth and help people understand the world. And in New York Times Cooking, we do that through recipes. And sometimes that means, for some of our columnists and writers, sometimes that means going out. You do both, so you're a great example. Melissa will either, I'm now speaking to the audience, Melissa will either go out into the world and report on a recipe that's made in a restaurant or made by a home cook, and then figure out how to translate that cooking into something that will work for you at home. Or, and this is an enviable skill that I don't share, she can, I imagine her lying back on a chaise lounge near her kitchen and just imagining flavors pop into her head, and then saying, like, this will be a good recipe, and then offering instruction that will allow that good recipe to be made by people at home. So it's a kind of a three-dimensional chess match every week as we try and figure out what we're bringing forth. And we're just thrilled that we get to work with the best people in the business to do that.
Okay, I love the whole image of me on a chaise lounge, because that's just so far from the truth. Like, I am like emptying the dishwasher is what's really happening. I'm emptying the dishwasher, or I am, going on a run or something. Like, I'm moving.
Yeah, maybe, but I'm going to push back a little bit, Melissa, because one of the things that happened during the pandemic, a lot of people in our world, on the food department in the New York Times, really had to step up during the pandemic, in part because obviously we're all working from home. It made it all the more difficult to pull all this stuff off, but also because there was just a boundless appetite, literal appetite, for what we were offering. People were stuck at home. They had all this stuff that they'd laid in, these sacks of rice and pounds of beans, and they weren't sure exactly what to do with those things. And New York Times Cooking was a huge balm to them. But Melissa Clark went one step beyond that to write a kind of, at one point it was daily, a kind of daily recipe built out of pantry food. And you didn't have time to lie on the chaise longue for that. But these were, the muse was coming down on your shoulder every day to provide like really actionable and interesting and delicious recipes for our readers and subscribers to make. And, that made you a quarantine queen.
Well, it was like a diary. It was what I was actually cooking every day. So, and I love to cook, and you love to cook too, Sam. And that is actually what which makes the whole endeavor so successful, is that everybody involved loves to cook. And I feel like that enthusiasm comes across and people really sense it. But another thing that I know, I keep hearing, and I wonder if you hear this, I hear from people all the time, another reason that they come back to NYT Cooking is because of its wonderful searchability. Like, you're like, okay, I've got carrots and I have prosciutto and I have polenta. What can I make for dinner? And then it'll tell you, and it does it really well. So, I mean, the back end too, it's like the engineers and the whole, it's like this giant, how many people do we have? It's a lot of people working.
Yeah, we have an enormous number of people working on our product, as we call it.
Yep.
And, I'm proud to work alongside every one of them. I'll say, yeah, we hear from people who thank us daily for what New York Times Cooking can do. But boy, there's always more to do. I think, I don't know if you've heard of this company called Google, but they've got apparently a lot of engineers. And so their search is really strong. And we're always going to be playing a little bit of catch up with the Google algorithms to figure out search. But if you are searching on Google you'll find us thanks to the work of our engineers, our search engine optimization crew, a whole lot of people. It's really interesting to spend a lifetime, as I have, working in newsrooms, and then to discover that in 2020, 2021, the team that I work on is comprised not just of writers and editors and photographers and photo editors, but of all these people with skills I didn't even know existed 7 years ago, and who are absolutely crucial to the success for our endeavors.
I would love to ask you, I think a lot of people know you, as a New York Times guy, as obviously the head of New York Times Cooking, but you also had a life beforehand. And I don't think many people know how you got into cooking and how you got into journalism. And I'd love you to tell that story.
Oh, sure, Melissa, I'd love to. I, like you, am a native Brooklynite, and I, like you, grew up in a household obsessed with food. So I spent a lot of time as a kid traveling around the city in search of ingredients and in search of special sandwiches or the right pizza or the right kind of pizza given the weather or whatever. And so I was a food obsessive early without realizing that this could be a career. This could be something I could do for money, until I got to college. And when I got to college, I went to Harvard, and I had a roommate who had a job at the Harvest in Harvard Square. And it seemed like the most glamorous, he was a bartender, and it seemed like the most glamorous job imaginable. So I hit him up, and I got a job at the Harvest as a cashier, which is the least glamorous job imaginable. And one of the cashier's jobs at the Harvest back then was to pull coffees. We didn't call them baristas then, but it was essentially to be the restaurant's barista. And I reckon, I worked lunch service a lot, I reckon that about 40% of the coffees that I pulled were for prep cooks and line cooks preparing for the evening service. And this seemed to me to take the kind of mystery and excitement of restaurants to like a whole new level. It just seemed so chaotic and exciting and adrenaline filled in there in that hot kitchen that I just wanted to be a part of it. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I knew that part of the reason I wanted to be a journalist is because there's always something new happening, because there's always adrenaline pulsing, because if there isn't a service, there's a day. You do your job, you finish your story, you put it in the paper, and you go to bed. And I sensed parallels in restaurant kitchens with that. So I talked my way into the kitchen, and I worked my way up. I was a prep cook for an age, and then I worked stations as on the line. I worked on garde manger. I moved to grill, saute. So I had all these different gigs going. And I just loved it. It was the complete opposite of anything that I was doing in school. It was physical work, but there was there was excitement, there was cash, there were, waitresses, like everything about it was just fantastic. So I did that all the way through graduation. And then I got a job in journalism in New York, and went down to do that. And maybe predictably found it to be really boring. It was a magazine job, very kind of low energy. So I left that job to become a teacher, which I think is related to both of these gigs. And finally got my way onto a paper, New York Press, and wrote about food there. And from that point on, I always had food in my back pocket. I've had jobs at the Times working on the culture desk, which I ran for a number of years, on the national news desk, which I ran for a number of years. Of course, I was a restaurant critic for a while, and so that naturally came in. But all throughout that, when I was on culture, when I was on national, I would write columns about food for the New York Times Magazine. I would write for the food section. I always had this abiding interest in the subject because I understand well that food is a way of starting a conversation with anyone, at any level of importance in the kind of social hierarchies. You can always get that person going with a conversation about food, perhaps especially when they say, oh, I don't really care about food. And anyone who says they don't care about food, all you need to do is ask them what they ate for breakfast, and you'll discover that they have an abiding interest in food and that they care deeply about what it is that they eat for breakfast. So that's where it started. Started at the bottom, now we're here.
I mean, I do think that, the national conversation about food has been getting deeper and broader at the same time over the past decade. And I don't think that I don't meet anyone who really doesn't care about food on some level. Maybe it's not cooking, but it's certainly, maybe it's about the environment, or maybe it's about politics. I mean, there's so much, food touches so many things. And I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like it'd be the rare person right now who say, well, I don't care at all.
Right,
do you ever meet anyone like that anymore?
In fact, people care so much that they're beginning to draw lines, right? So it's funny, in my correspondence, when I hear from someone with a really heartfelt plea that we embrace vegan cooking as all that we do, and that it's the only sensible thing to be done for the environment. And man, I hear it. I hear the passion in the plea. I have a different job, but I hear the passion there. And I love the fact that New York Times Cooking can be a place where we can discuss these things, report on these things, explore, and at the literal end of the day, come back with a delicious recipe that'll make people's lives better.
To touch on that a little bit, we just got a question in about our brand new Veggie Newsletter, because, we are focusing a lot more on meatless cuisine. That is something that I know all of us, certainly the recipe writers and the editors care very much about. So why don't you talk a little bit about how that came about?
Absolutely. So what's interesting about it is, and I hope that this comes through in everything that we do at New York Times Cooking, it's not doctrinaire, right? The Veggie Newsletter is written by Tejal Rao, who is an omnivore and the California restaurant critic for the New York Times. As such, she eats everything. But in her civilian life, or in her newslettering life, she cooks meatlessly a lot. And when you look around our ranks in the staff of New York Times Cooking, you discover that's not totally uncommon. It's not even totally uncommon for carnivorous brutes like myself, who 7 years ago, everybody was turning to me for, large format meats and, how to grill and how to burn meat and all that kind of stuff. But in my life today, and in the lives of countless Americans, less meat on the table is happening just naturally. And we want to be there to meet our readers and subscribers as such. And we're not going to do it by saying we have rules and those rules can't be violated. What we're going to say is there are some delicious recipes. If you're interested in cooking with less animal protein, we've got delicious recipes for you. And what's fascinating to me about the last 18 months of our lives is how people have come to that, not through politics, not even through health, but through a kind of new understanding of how they eat and how what their relationship to food is like as a result of cooking 3 times a day, week after week after week, month after month after month. I suspect, for those who follow us in the world of New York Times Cooking, those who cook with us a lot, that portion sizes are coming down, that the kind of radical excess is coming down. And I suspect for many of us, as we return to restaurants, whether tentatively now or with con brio later, that we're going to be like, wow, those portions are big. Those are too big for me. I don't eat that much. And again, I think our recipes can help reflect that.
Do you think that people are going to continue to cook as much as they've been cooking during the pandemic, or do you think that people are going to kind of go back to their former habits?
I think we've seen a sea change. And the sea change is this: people, many more, vastly more Americans know how to cook now than did. And so when it comes to the decision to go out on a Friday night and order roast chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans and a nice glass of wine, I think that having done that and then seeing a bill for, $120 for two people, they may say, like, I roast a pretty good chicken at home and it's not a big production. And so I'm going to roast chicken on Friday night for my sweetie. I think more of that is going to happen than we think. But by the same token, going out for a special dinner where you're going to have food that is not of the sort that you would prepare for yourself, like, that's a rare treat, and one that I think we're going to see people going back to. There's a whole financial line on all of this. I talked about the sticker shock of the roast chicken, but I think in order for restaurants, which are having a terrible time filling out staff now, as the pandemic, I hesitate to say winds down, but as we kind of continue to live more easily with the coronavirus, restaurants are having a hard time staffing, and restaurant prices are going to go up. And I think we may see an understanding of restaurants as a special occasion event, a kind of cultural event, in a way that obviously we haven't during the pandemic. But the kind of meal that I don't see us going out for quite as voraciously as we did in the past is like down to the bar for a burger or down to the bar for a roast chicken.
But I just hope it doesn't mean that, I think about this a lot. I'm like, yes, I agree with you, but I want all of the neighborhood restaurants, to like, even if they're not special occasion places, but they're still beloved date places. And like, those are the ones I want to survive and to thrive. And, watching the way that they came through this pandemic and are coming through this pandemic has been really inspiring. Spoken from, I rarely go to restaurants, but my heart is still with them. And, this, their longevity culturally as well. So
totally. I was in one of the restaurants that you described not that long ago, here in Brooklyn, a restaurant that is a classic neighborhood restaurant. It's
Which
where
one?
Saint-Jules Vert, on Clinton Street. And I just was like, I'm so glad this is here. I'm so glad that there are couples out on dates at this restaurant. It was thrilling to see, and it's thrilling to see that they're managing a business there. So I think good neighborhood restaurants will do aces. They've shown that they can survive, and I hope that they can continue to.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we have more questions coming in, and I want to remind everybody that if you want to type in a question, you go to slido.com and you just do hashtag curated cuisine. And we have one. Okay, how many food writers contribute to NYT Cooking? How many do we have?
Oh, well, I will tell you
off
this.
the top of your head?
We've hired 8 in the last year, so that's a start right there. I bet it works out to about 20.
Wow.
I think we got about 20 people who are either full-time or who regularly freelance for us creating recipes, whether off the dome, as I say, or through the kind of reporting that I've been trying to do my whole career. So it's a lot. And then you add everybody else, it's a big old staff.
And then we have another question. And how many times on average do you have to prepare a recipe to perfect it? And I feel like I should take that.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw it to you, Melissa, because you have vastly more experience in actually perfecting recipes. I generally just try to make them work. No, I'm kidding. It's a different game for me, because what I'm doing most of the time is taking recipes that chefs or professional cooks are offering for sale in their fancy restaurants, and I'm trying to reverse engineer them to the home, and I can do that in a few shots. But I really want to hear your answer to this question, because I think that there are moments when you know, the muse does land on your shoulder, and you really do want to somehow pair the rhubarb with the anchovies, with the lime, with the quail or whatever. And how long does it take?
Yeah.
How many strikes do you get before you get a hit?
Well, I mean, you know, luckily I've been doing this long enough that when I see that it's not working, I can shift gears pretty quickly. But some things like baking takes a really long time. Like if I have something in my head, if I have an image in my head and it's a baked good, because the chemistry is so, you cannot play fast and loose. You need to be very methodical about the way that you bring things in and take them out. It can take me like a dozen times, literally a dozen times, more than that even, to get, you know, an exact cookie or a pie that I want. But that's but that's fun. You know, I get to eat all that stuff too. And it's
of course. I talk to my daughter, you know, we're raising them up. I got a second generation of food people coming up behind me. And I talk to my daughter about this all the time because she's forever taking, you know, she'll take one of your recipes and she'll cross it with somebody else's, and then she'll be furious because it doesn't work. And I'm like, Claire, her name is Claire, I'll say, you've adjusted like too many variables. You need to change one thing at a time in order to get yourself to where you're going. She loathes it when I say stuff like that.
You know, it's hard though. I understand, because when you're cooking savory food, you can really do that. You can just be like, and you can adjust it as you go.
Yep.
But you can't do that with baking. So savory recipes are a lot more forgiving, and I can make them, you know, minimum of 3 times, and I usually nail them in 4 to 5 times, right?
Excellent.
Minimum of 3.
That's squares.
Recipes take a long time. They really do. Like I'm working on our pies for Thanksgiving. And, you know, I have this pecan pie that I've been working on for a while, and I'm probably up to about pie number 7. I think I've got it, but it's just like adjusting that sugar, because you want it to be gooey, but you don't want it to be too sweet. You don't want your teeth to hurt. So but you can't go down too far, because then you're losing the essence of what it is, you know? So, and it's a slow process, and my neighbors, you know, are really happy to eat all the extra pie. So it's all good.
All good.
It's all good. Okay, let's see. Here's another question. I love that you are all sending questions. Keep them coming. I'm going to ask this question, and then Sam, we're going to talk about your book, because I have it right here and I love it. I love talking about it. Okay. As a recipe developer, how do I stay respectful in my work and not appropriate, claim, change traditional recipes from other cultures? So this is an issue that people have been talking a lot about over the past year, especially. It's really important. And it's something that we talk about a lot at the Times. So Sam, talk about it.
This is in 2021, 2022, this is like one of the most important questions that we can wrestle with and need to wrestle with and do wrestle with on a daily basis. In order to get to how we think about this, there are a couple of ground rules that I want to kind of lay out. One is this idea of traditional, like the idea of authentic, is kind of hokum. It's kind of bogus. Food changes, recipes change. How people make a particular dish in a particular culture changes from family to family, from block to block, from neighborhood to neighborhood. And no one iteration of the dish can kind of claim supremacy over the other. If you want to talk about adobo, the national dish of the Philippines, well, there 1,100 islands in the Philippines, and there are probably like 2,200 recipes for adobo, all of which can claim authenticity or claim to be the real deal. And of course, all of them are, and none of them are. And so when you're reporting, when you're developing recipes that lead, or when you're doing reporting that's going to lead to the development of recipes, that has to be in the background of your mind. But that said, it doesn't mean that I can come in and make an adobo that it in no way speaks to any of those 1,100 or 2,200 other versions that are Filipino, and then claim it as my own as adobo. So one of the changes we made to New York Times Cooking in the last 18 months or so is to address this very fact. I spend a lot of time talking to others about their recipes and then adapting those recipes for use in the Times. And for years, this goes back to Craig Claiborne, it goes back to Jane Nickerson before him, the byline on that recipe would be mine or Jane's or Craig's or Melissa's, even if the source was someone else. And so what we've done now is, and it seems like a small thing, but it's a big thing, is to offer credit for whose recipe it was originally and who adapted it. So I'm happy to adapt a recipe for adobo, but I'm not claiming ownership of a recipe for adobo. I'm saying this comes from the chefs and owners of the Purple Yam in Brooklyn or wherever it comes from. So that's important. A related issue that I think is important is not to play fast and loose with words or styles or the names of dishes in pursuit of, you know, a win in search or a win in social media. We saw this during the craze, the absolute craze for birria tacos. So these kind of stewed meat tacos, which became a thing on TikTok, a thing on Instagram, a thing in restaurants, and all of a sudden there are birria tacos everywhere. And it seemed pretty clear, like, boy, we want to, like, A, they're delicious, B, we want to get a good recipe for that on the site. How are we going to do that? And the way we did it was through reporting. And we sent Tejal Rao, who we've talked about already, out into the world to kind of look at how this dish made it out of Mexico and into California, and from California traveled across the United States and was interpreted in different ways by different Mexican and non-Mexican restaurant cooks to kind of capture the zeitgeist. And then the recipes that we did include came from some of those original chefs who had brought the dish north. And I think that's probably the most honest way of doing it. If, on the other hand, you're a pure recipe developer, not reporting stuff out, but just, as I say, coming up with stuff off the dome, it's important literally not to claim ownership of a dish, but also not to do it kind of offhandedly. So you'll see a lot in the language that we use to describe dishes. We'll say inspired by, or a riff on, or a version of, or, you know, in some cases, a pure bastardization of a dish that we're interested in that comes from afar. I think that I don't want us ever to live in a world where you can only write about and develop recipes that come from your racial, ethnic, gendered, socioeconomic status. Like, I think curious and empathetic journalists of the sort who we work with should be able to write about the world in all of its many flavors. But by the same token, I want to make sure that we're honoring where stuff comes from and we're being truthful and straightforward about the source of the information that we're bringing forth. That's a pretty long-winded answer, but I think—
No, but it's because it's really important. And these are the things, I mean, this is stuff that we wrestle with, like you said, it's like every day. I want to add to that, when I'm thinking of doing a recipe from another culture, and, you know, frankly, most of the recipes I do are because I'm an Ashkenazi Jew and our cuisine only goes so far. I mean,
right.
You know, it's like brisket is great, but it gets you this far.
Imagine being Scots-Irish.
Yeah, exactly.
What do I have?
Exactly. But I mean, but I don't take it lightly. Any recipe that I do, it needs to be, it's my responsibility as a developer to do the research and to talk to people and to read cookbooks and to see what's out there and to kind of immerse myself in the background. I need to come to the recipe knowing what is out there. So, and understanding it and having a lot of love and respect for that recipe already. And that needs to come through. And I think that's really important, is to start, you know, to do the research and start from a place of respect.
I think I'll just add one more note to that, which I also think is important, which is if you want to build a business out of this stuff, which is what we wanted to do at the New York Times, you can't simply do it with me and Melissa, right? The voices that are in our room now, the people in the room where it happens, are far more diverse than they were in the age of Craig Claiborne, far more diverse than they were when I arrived at the Times 20 years ago. It's been a real sea change, and an important one, because it allows us actually to do our jobs better and to really truly leverage the lived experiences of our staff to finding the best and most delicious recipes in the world and bringing them to our subscribers.
Now let's talk a little bit about bringing non-recipes to our subscribers. Let's talk about your book and no recipe recipes.
Okay, so here's the truth. Here's the truth. They are recipes. They're just recipes of a different form, and they actually came out of the newsletter that I write for the Times. I would include them on Wednesdays, and it was a way to, Nora Ephron said, everything is copy. It was a way for me to get my actual cooking into print, things that I was making at home, things that that I developed because my kids wanted X or Y, or because there happened to be, a lamb shank in the freezer and I had time to defrost it. And so I wanted a way to document the food that I actually cook, which I think is pretty delicious. That you get, is someone calling you? It's probably the desk. They just want to check on one of your stories.
I thought I turned that off on my computer, and apparently I didn't. Sorry, I turned everything else off.
No worries. So I wanted to document the food that I was actually making at home, and I wanted to kind of explore and mess around with something I discovered while reporting on recipes with restaurant chefs. Restaurant chefs, as you well know, Melissa, are terrible recipe writers, just the worst, because they either are scaling everything up to giant portions, or they're so used to having kind of code-filled conversations with their line cooks that they don't have to, they speak in a kind of shorthand, and they can kind of say, oh, you sweat the onions and you do this, you do that. And having developed a gajillion recipes off of conversations with chefs that are like, oh, just do this, and then when it's done, you do that, I thought, wouldn't it be neat? I'm able to cook off of those instructions. Wouldn't it be interesting if that were possible for our readers as well? If I just spoke to them conversationally about what to make and said, it doesn't really matter if you make exactly what I'm saying. It's just a prompt. It's like, it's not, I often say that recipes are like sheet music, and no recipes aren't sheet music. They're like a chord chart. It's like, here are 3 chords out of which you can build a pretty great country western song. But if you don't have pinto beans, you can make it a reel, or you can, make it a pop song. And I think there's real freedom in it. And the reaction from readers has indicated that they're feeling that freedom themselves.
And so, one thing that I love about the no recipe recipes is that I feel like it builds confidence. Aside from freedom, I feel like, you do one once and you're like, oh my God, I can do this. And do people talk about that, about the confidence building? Do you think that it makes them feel like empowered in a way?
I absolutely do. I think one of the things that I say to people who are new to New York Times Cooking, and people who've been around for a while, is you're going to have a great time cooking these recipes, but please don't make those recipes for the first time when you need them to deliver. In other words, like, making the steak Diane for 2 on the night that you want to propose marriage and it goes awry, like, just make it a few times. It'll make the recipe your own. You'll feel confident about it. And I think that's true. What I love about the no recipe recipes is, at a certain point, for cooks who lack confidence or cooks who have confidence but haven't yet kind of explored where that might take them. It's a really kind of low worry way of achieving success and feeling like, hey, I do have this. I can finish this dish. I can make it delicious, and I can do it on the fly according to my own tastes and interests and according to what I have in the pantry.
So now, as far as the book, so you started to do them you started to do the no recipe recipes in your newsletter. And then at what point did you say, oh my gosh, I have enough for a book? And how did the book come about?
Well, this is a testament to the excellence of people who work at the New York Times. It was in the Wednesday newsletter for years. And I thought at one point, maybe this could be something. And it was like an immense amount of work, but I went back and I found like 30 of them. And we decided, okay, we're going to make it into a special section in the New York Times. And we made a tabloid or a kind of like the Boston Herald. We made a Boston Herald version of No Recipe Recipes. We called it You Don't Need a Recipe. And there were 30 or 35 of these things laid out. And that served as a really good kind of calling card when we wanted to sell it as a book. And our publisher, 10 Speed Press, part of Random House, was eager to do it. And we needed 100 of these things. And I was like, 100? Well, you know how long it takes to develop recipes. Like, what am I going to do? And it's going to be, what a bear it will be to figure out, like, how am I going to find every Wednesday going back for 5 years? And then one of the editors on the desk who works on the newsletter said, oh, I've been saving those for the past 4 years. I have a Google document. I just clip them out.
I didn't know that. Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
So I had this source document. There was hundreds of these things. And we were able to go through and assemble a tremendous list of 100. And then I had to do a little more work on them and figure them out. And then we shot them up and wrote them up and got them into the book, and off it went into the marketplace.
And I think, one of the things that is really great about the book that you don't have in the newsletter is the photos. And every recipe has a photo, right, Sam? Pretty much. And that's 100%. Really important. And I'm going to show everybody one of Sam's favorites and my favorites. Look at that. Can you see that? That's the meatball salad. And Sam, I want you to walk us through, tell us how to make with a no recipe. Tell us how to make this delicious meatball salad. And also, what the heck made you want to make a meatball salad? It's genius, but kooky.
It is genius. It is a little bit kooky. And of course, it comes from a restaurant chef. There's a wonderful pizzeria in Brooklyn called Lucali, run by a guy named Mark Iacono, who, like Melissa and May, grew up in Brooklyn and born and raised in Brooklyn. And all he serves at this restaurant is pizza. Occasionally, he'll serve meatballs. And then once I was in there, and he said, Sam, I got this meatball salad, and you got to try it. And he brought me out what looked like an iceberg salad from an Italian-American restaurant with a meatball on top of it with a little sauce. And I ate it, and I just thought it was so astonishingly good. And I was like, this is going to be a no recipe recipe. Why is it going to be a no recipe recipe? Because the most important part of it is in the salad. The meatball, his meatball is fantastic, but your meatballs are fantastic. And I bet the people on this call, their meatballs are fantastic. People have good meatball recipes. What they don't have is this crazy idea of using the meatball on top of a cold salad, hot meatball, cold salad. And then what about that cold salad? And Mark told me a story, which was about Sunday dinners at his mother's house in Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn, where the salad would come out and she would serve it in the remains of the lasagna, or serve it into the bowl where you were eating the pasta with the Sunday gravy, and it would sit and the tomatoes would kind of bleed out, and like it just had this kind of acidic, sweet crunchy coldness that he was like, I wonder how you could do that and then sell it for money in his restaurant. And the way he did that was by marinating the tomatoes, and he just uses like supermarket tomatoes. So you cut the tomatoes up, you marinate them with a lot of salt, like an aggressive amount of salt. He uses lemon pepper, so I do as well. And then an aggressive amount of red wine vinegar and rather less of oil, but an aggressive amount of red wine vinegar. Red wine vinegar and the salt bring a lot of flavor into the tomato, but also get it to bleed out and make a kind of vinaigrette on its own that's just fantastic. And then layering those marinated tomatoes on top of really cold torn sheets of iceberg with, you know, some celery top in there, maybe some black olives and the like, just creates a kind of awesome salad that you wouldn't like. I mean, you'd think it's a really good salad, but you're like, where's my Sunday gravy or what have you? And that's where the meatball comes in. So you take your best quality meatball, the meatball you've made your whole life for spaghetti and meatballs, and you just take one or two of those and put them on top of that composed salad. And it's just bonkers how good it is. And I made it, and like, it was like a cover band version of what Mark made. I put it into the cookbook, and I've heard from people all over the country who make it, and I guarantee how they make it is different from how I make it or Mark makes it or you makes it, but it's bringing people a lot of pleasure. And I think it's that combination, that quintessentially American combination of hot and cold, crisp and salt, astringent and slightly spicy, that makes it a hit. I urge everyone to buy that book, if only for that recipe.
So that one is obviously speaking to people on so many levels. I think it's a universal. I mean, because like you said, salad and meatball, right? Are there other recipes? Like what do you feel like the recipes that work the best in this no recipe format are? If are there a couple of other ones that you've?
Yeah, I think whenever you give people something where it's like a form where you're doing something where you're either saying put hot on cold, or use this methodology that you use for something. I'll give you an example of something that does very well out of the book, and that's like a Hasselback kielbasa.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you take this. You could use any smoked meat sausage. I use kielbasa because there's a big Polish community in Brooklyn. And then treat it like a Hasselback potato. I'm cutting it almost all the way through, all the way around these coins, all the way around the kielbasa, and then roasting that off in the oven with a kind of glaze of, in my case, but you can do it however you like, but I do it with mustard and apricot jam, and just brushing that on there until you've created an enormous amount of surface area and it's crisped up everywhere. And you serve that with some potatoes or some roasted onions, and people are like, that's bonkers. And you're like, yeah, it's a Hasselback kielbasa. You know who did most of the work? The guy who made the kielbasa.
Speaking of the guy who made the kielbasa, see, these transitions are so easy with you, Sam. So we have another question from the audience. Eating less meat is great, but I would love to see more discussion about sourcing small-scale, well-raised meat. Eat less, but eat better.
Oh, love it.
Such good, right? So good.
What a great question. I'm going to be a little bit of a pedant before I answer, which is that one of the things that I have loathed the most about the food world over the course of the past 10 years has been how it has embraced the verb source as a verb. Like, where do you source your tomatoes? I don't know. I buy mine at the farmer's market. Like, let's just buy ingredients. That said, the source of ingredients is really, really important. And when it comes to kind of not just lessening the amount of meat you eat, but lessening the carbon footprint of the meat you eat, getting it close to home and having it be well raised, and sometimes having it be spectacularly expensive, is a marvelous way of discovering how good the animal proteins that we can have really are. And I had this experience throughout the pandemic where I would come into possession of, as you know, Melissa, I spend a lot of time fishing. I have a lot of fishing friends, a lot of hunting friends, and come into possession of a piece of tuna loin off of ethically harvested yellowfin tuna. And it's so fantastic, so blow off the doors better than anything that I could get even at a fantastic fishmonger, that I'm overjoyed. But I find that I also can't eat very much of it because it's so rich, so filled with fat and flavor and deliciousness that my portion size goes down. Likewise with a heritage pig, where you get, a pork chop off a non-commodity raised pig, but one of these pigs that went to, Oberlin and speaks Latin and like gets a lot of massages and stuff, like that pig, you don't need a very big pork chop off of that to eat, because it's so flavorful. It's so filling and delicious. So I'm a big fan of spending more money than you think, but on fewer ounces, and finding that it all works out in the end. It's invaluable in understanding what's really going on in our food supply chain to do that. It's very, very difficult to go back to kind of commodity meats when you've tasted what can happen when people really put care into the health and wellness and deliciousness of the animals that they're raising for harvest.
And I think, just to speak about, well, how do you find these people, right? How do you find the people who are raising meat in an ethical way? Obviously, I think it takes a little bit more work. And I actually do feel like that's why people use the word source. I mean, I agree with you that, yes, it shouldn't, but the idea is that it's work, and that it's up to you as the consumer to do that work and to ask the questions. And so, how do you know if your meat is ethically raised? You gotta maybe ask the questions at the butcher. Find a farmer's market where you can actually talk to the person raising the meat, and this stuff, it takes you out of your way. But I think that, you're going out of the way, but you're also doing it in a way that is supporting people who really are doing, there's a term, regenerative farming, that people use a lot when it comes to certain types of agriculture, and especially with livestock. And there are ways to raise animals that are more responsible, certainly, than the way most of our meat is raised. And I just think that it's up to us, certainly as reporters, to report on that, which we do. We care about doing that. And it's up to consumers to ask the questions before they buy. Yeah,
absolutely. And it also shouldn't be a chore, right? Food is a cultural act, and a perfectly raised Berkshire pig is a cultural product, same as a painting, I would argue. And we got to go find them. And the place to start is at your farmer's market. And the things to do are to ask questions. And once you find that person who grows that perfect chicken or egg or makes the beautiful pork, you're going to stick with that person for a long time, because they're providing you with the deliciousness.
Exactly. Okay, let's see. So we have a question that might be a great last question. Says Amy. Thank you, Amy. What's the next big project or innovation for NYT Cooking? And by the way, and then they also say this person is making a comment that says, No Recipe Recipes is now my go-to holiday gift. That is an excellent choice. I don't know who wrote that question, but excellent choice.
Well, I want to just say thank you to that person who's made it a holiday choice, because I really enjoy multiple sales of the book. I think that anybody who's buying one, you buy two, you can just give it to a cousin. We got the holidays coming up. It's great. So I thank you. My family thanks you. I really appreciate it. As for New York Times Cooking and its continued development, I think we got a lot of different directions we're going to go in. We'll always be built on a foundation of recipes. And so the question for me is, what form are those recipes going to take? We've done very well with No Recipe Recipes. And I think, I don't want to break news here tonight, but I think we're going to continue to explore the world of cookbooks, something Melissa knows more about than your average American. And I think we'll benefit from her oversight. I'd really like us to do more cookbooks. I think also one of the things that we're starting to explore what the technocrats call the off-platform world. That is the kind of world of New York Times Cooking that doesn't exist on New York Times Cooking, but exists on our Instagram channel and on our YouTube channel. And hey, like and subscribe, you guys, like and subscribe. You'll see we're exploring recipe forums, and we're exploring the business of helping people get confident in the kitchen through, should I call it filmed entertainment? No, I don't think so. I think through kind of moving images. And I think there's a, who's to say what the form of a recipe in 2030 is compared to a recipe in 2021. I look back at the recipes that Mr. Claiborne put into the New York Times cookbook, and they don't have any of the things that I told you are necessary for a successful cookbook, right? There are no photographs, there are no top notes, there's no explanation, there's just ingredients and instruction. And we've gone well beyond that into a world that's much more kind of luxe and interesting. Is there another step forward into video recipes? I think there very well may be, or at least into a kind of filmed insight into how to cook and how we cook, and into, I dare say, a little bit of entertainment. If you go to youtube.com/NYT Cooking, you'll see some really delicious food being prepared, but you'll also have a really good time watching some of our contributors run around in our studio kitchen on the west side of Manhattan. You'll see Melissa doing it, in fact. And I think we're going to use that studio kitchen to the best of our ability to continue to increase the size of our audience and to continue to delight that audience through recipes in whatever form they take. But for this evening, that form is no recipes. And I really hope you'll take a look at the book and join our movement.
Yeah, I would like to just, end on the note that I think I forget what the link is. Amy gave a link. There is an independent bookseller who is selling this book somewhere that, I hope there's a link that you guys can see, but you should buy it at your local independent books seller. And it's really, it is really great. Let's see. Oh, okay. So I can end by thanking, I'm getting my script here on my cell phone. You can end by thanking the audience and telling them to go to, WBUR/events.org. There we go. And let's see, to see the fall lineup, including our curated cuisine with, this is going to be really good. Dory Greenspan is coming, and she is one of our contributors. So please definitely.
She's the greatest.
Jacques Orion, Tracy Chan, and it's Brookline Booksmith. Brookline Booksmith is selling the book, so you can get it from them. So, and that is all we have for you. Thank you all for joining us. Sam, thank you. You are always such a delight to talk to. I don't get to see you enough, so this is like social time. And thanks to everybody at WBUR.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.